well travelled. I've been in New Zealand, I've been in Australia, in China, in Russia. I've been up in the Arctic, I've been down the Antarctic. And I've always met people who knew about Leith, because Leith is it's a way of life.
Leith is a community.
Leith Walk has its character, it's got its heritages and traditions. It was a town before in the past.
There's a clear distinction between Leith and Edinburgh, I feel, as a Leither.
We've got everything in Leith we would want to have.
I'm not from Hunningside, I'm not from Stockbridge, I'm from Leith. I'm not a Portobello person, I'm from Leith.
Everything seemed to gravitate back between the wars, and it was almost like that was when the Leith identity was really cemented, and everything after the war had been a bit of a kind of unravelling at that point.
The closest I get to the old Leith is Gala Day. The Gala Day, and kids are doing what we done as kids.
You know, way back, Leith Walk was a Scots community with some foreigners. Now there's a big foreign community of people who have emigrated to this area. Because the beauty of Leith is you could be living next to someone very working class, someone almost semi-aristocratic. The tenements are quite a mixed bunch.
I think coming from abroad, you are trying to find identity with a place you live in, because anyone needs kind of feeling of sense of belonging, and I think I found it in Leith.
We are a small village who spread around the world, and our influence is spread all around the world and still can spread around the world, but only if you give us a chance.
The impression that Paul and I got when we were working there was that Leith had such a strong identity and such a strong shared sense of identity. So we wanted something that embodied that, and that didn't embody it as an outsider's comment on it, but speak to people in a way that they all felt that it was speaking for them. And also at that time, because Leith was in such a state of transition, there was a sense of wanting to capture it for the people who did consider themselves as old Leithers. And while Leith was going through this big period of change, that they felt that they had something which encapsulated what Leith meant for them. And our intention to begin with was very much not big, splashy, high-profile things, but definitely things that were well integrated, quite low-key, and had a lot of community involvement. And really, the history mural on Great Junction Street, that was like the sort of culmination of the project, and that was the final swan song of it, in that was the big, splashy, high-profile piece. But by that stage, we were feeling a lot more integrated with the community, and it didn't feel like an act of presumption by them, because we felt that we were in a position to do something which would actually strike a chord with local residents of Leith.
I live and have worked in Leith for many years, and I have enjoyed every minute of it. Well, when I was here in the 1970s, I would say that a lot of Leith was very derelict and run down. Big warehouses were empty and unused, and lot of nice homes and has not properly looked after.
Everybody felt the key thing that anchored Leith was its connection to the sea and things nautical, the docks. So up at the top, this is where it all starts, by the water. And down this side, this is the world of work. And we have dominating it the figure of a man and a woman. And the woman's holding a crate from the bottling plant, which was one of the main areas of employment for women at the time in Leith. And the man is holding a docker's hook, and he's a docker. And then the other side to the world of work was the world of unemployment. This scene here represents a memory that people had of the conditions of employment, your original 0 hours contract, where people just turned up at the gates of the docks and the foreman would come out and go, you, and you, and everyone else would then turn away and walk off without work for that day.
It was sad, the decline of the shipbuilding industry. Another industry that used to fill Leith docks at night times when there was thousands of people pouring out the docks going home. You could tell it was 5 o'clock because the 5 o'clock hooter went. That's when the people started pouring out the docks in their thousands. I mean, the Leith docks was a big employer at one stage. You had 1,000 people working in the shipyards. You had all the other ancillary industries that were about in the docks. It was really, really, really busy. It supported all the small shopkeepers in the area. They all thrived on it.
Industries that used to be here were, of course, cargoes, ships coming in with cargo, and dockers working on ships, and White and Mackay bottling factory, Crawford's biscuits, the SEI, they made fertiliser, the whisky warehouses, which closed up, and lots of lovely young artists and people like that took over and rented spaces there to do their painting, and so Leith began to have a different aspect of workforces.
This building here was owned by a wine merchant, where there was many of them in Leith, because wine was such a big part of the economy in Leith for hundreds and hundreds of years. Then we had this decline of the docks.
The mood of this was definitely a nostalgic one, because shipbuilding, by the time this mural came along, was history in Leith, although absolutely a central and important part of the history. And I wanted to try and capture something of the kind of the wistfulness of that, looking back on these great days of shipbuilding. And also I had this difficult and interesting shape to fill. And I actually lighted on a Renaissance painting by Fra Angelico of Christ being lowered from the cross. And the composition of it was so tight, and it had all this sense of emotional intensity about it. And I actually almost lifted that composition straight to create this group here. And this large wooden pattern, if you read that as the body of Christ, these are the disciples lowering him from the cross.
ਜਦ ਹੋਏ ਭਾਰਤ ਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਦੋ ਹਿੱਸੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਛੱਡਿਆ ਗਲੋਟੀਆਂ ਭਾਂਡੇ ਵਾਲਾ ਨੀ ਮਾਂ ਜਦ ਹੋਏ ਭਾਰਤ ਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਦੋ ਹਿੱਸੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਛੱਡਿਆ ਗਲੋਟੀਆਂ ਭਾਂਡੇ ਵਾਲਾ ਨੀ ਮਾਂ When Mother India was torn into, you left your villages of Glotiya and Pandewala. You came to Bombay, leaving behind friends, playmates, brothers and sisters. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਨ ਮੁੰਬਈ ਲਾਏ ਡੇਰੇ ਨਿਖਰੇ ਸਾਥੀ ਦੋਸਤ ਤੇ ਭੈਣ ਭਰਾ ਨੀ ਮਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਪਏ ਵਿਛੋੜੇ ਸਦਾ ਲਈ ਫਿਰ ਪਏ ਵਿਛੋੜੇ ਸਦਾ ਲਈ ਜਦ ਚੜੇ ਜਹਾਜ਼ ਵਲੈਤ ਨੂੰ ਨੀ ਮਾਂ ਤੇਰੀ ਨੇ ਅਸੀਸ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਸਦਾ ਖੁਸ਼ ਰਵੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਆਵੇ ਠੰਡੀ ਹਵਾ ਤੇਰੀ Then, separated forever when you boarded the ships and planes to Britain. Your mother gave you blessings. Be happy in your new life and let the gentle breezes bring messages of your well-being. But the unspoken words in her heart said, we are being separated by oceans and mother and daughter may never meet again.
Home I'm going, home I need a land to heal my soul. Take me home, over the green, green fields and far away. Home to the motherland, home to the motherland, home to the motherland and over the hills and far away.
I think it's always nice for people to discover history, and by that I don't just mean the kind of history you might learn in school or the big events. Of course they're interesting as well, but you always have to remember that when you're talking about big historical events, those events affect normal people. Of course, I do personally, and one of the reasons I was really interested in being involved in this project is because of what's happening right now in terms of migration. Of course, when we started this project, we were seeing stories on the news the whole time about migrants coming to Europe and the awful stories of drownings happening in the Mediterranean. Of course, they're not on the news so much anymore, but they're still happening all the time. So for me personally, to do a project about migration, to do with people coming and going and the positive traits that they were leaving was a very important thing for me. Tales from the Hanging Captain was the first piece of theatre that we developed as part of Leith Moves, and this came from a process really of the drama group exploring some of the history of Leith docks and bringing some of these stories in and what we want to look at. And we worked again with writer Duncan Kidd to kind of tease out some of the things that we might want to explore. So Tales from the Hanging Captain was set in a fictional pub in Leith called the Hanging Captain, which had been the oldest pub in Leith, and really looked back at some of that history, so some local history and some history going back hundreds of years. We looked at three main events. We looked at the Leith dockers' strike.
It lasted for 7 weeks and involved 4,000 workers. Their demands included a penny an hour on a day rent! Yay!
1 o'clock stop on a Saturday!
Yay!
An end to employment of non-union labour!
Yay! 600 free labourers and extra police were brought in to break this strike. Such was the worry about a strike epidemic that on the 17th of July 1913, 6 naval gunboats were brought into Leith Harbour.
We looked at the Darien scheme.
England had an empire. Scotland wanted one too, so set out to get one. Ships left Leith to found a colony in Panama at Darien, but England didn't want a rival, and some say England ruined Scotland's chances, sabotaged them. So at the beginning of the story, Scotland's angry, very angry, looking for an excuse for revenge.
And we looked at the whaling industry.
Once it was a grand adventure. Now it's mechanised slaughter.
So we picked those 3 areas out of all the hundreds of areas that we could look at to explore in Tales from the Hanging Captain. The process that went into Tales from the Hanging Captain was very much the drama group identifying what they wanted to look at and explore. And we thought, actually moving into year 2 of the project, we wanted to have more voices in there. So we used the performances to invite audience members to share their own stories. So we had beer mats that they could write their stories down on, but we also held post-show discussions where people could share their own stories. And we used those to move into the second stage of the project. And that stage was to hear more voices. So we invited people to join a research group where they could share stories. And we also looked in the drama group about involving these stories within the process a little bit more.
Home I'm leaving, home I need a land to save my soul. Take me on, over the green, green fields and far away. Home's now another land, home's now another land, home's now another land, it's over the hills and far away.
I suppose the Waves on the Sea started from the research group, and some of the stuff that was coming up through the research group was looking broadly at the idea of migration, so immigration and emigration to Leith. And also they also had a focus on food and how that affected the food, so how the different cultures coming in and going out affected the different types of food that were available here. So we started to devise and develop little pieces about people leaving and coming, but also connecting to the cast themselves. Very few of the cast are from Leith. Some are from Scotland, some are from the UK, but lots are from outside of the UK as well. So there was lots of stories there and thoughts about immigration and emigration. And we started to develop all these little scenes until we had 3 kind of main chapters we wanted to tell of arriving, leaving and eating. So we started to weave these together. And the kind of form that we took in the end was to tell the story of 3 generations of Italian immigrants here. So a grandmother, if you like, who moved from Italy in the 1950s, her daughter, and then her granddaughter who decided to leave Leith to go to Australia. And throughout that main story, we added in little snippets and snapshots of people coming and leaving and eating throughout the centuries within Leith.
The play is about journeys and people leaving their home, leaving places they know, people they love, to try life somewhere else. They've got expectations and it probably never turns out the way they think it will. It's also about family, it's about keeping traditions that you brought with you, maybe adopting traditions from places that you've made your home.
The play is mainly about 3 generations of Italian women. It's also about lots of different cultures and food and entrances and exits from Leith.
The play is about immigration, a hot topic at the moment. Leith has always been one of these places where people have come and passed through on their way to other places and arriving in Scotland.
Today is about 2 families coming together, but it's also about 2 communities coming together as well. And if you think about it, that's a little bit what makes Leith the way it is. The people come into here and the world goes back out again, and it always has. And every time it does, it leaves a little bit of itself behind. Ladies and gentlemen, the bride and groom. The bride and groom!
We wanted to show that in this particular climate, in which there seems to be a lot of demonising of migrants, lots of talking about migration, that actually to show that migration and immigration and emigration is just something that has happened for hundreds if not thousands of years, that it's actually a very natural part of human society. People are going to move around, bring cultures, bring food this whole time. And this isn't a kind of a recent thing. And actually we wanted to show this as being a very positive thing, that we live in Leith, which is this great area of Edinburgh, which has got all these influence going back hundreds of years because of migration. And it was really important for me and for some of the cast that we showed this positive effect of migration.
I've not always lived in Leith. I was born and brought up in Glasgow. My father came over from India, which is Lahore, but now is considered in Pakistan since the partition.
My father came to Scotland with my mum when they got married in 1967. father came to work in Valvona and Crowless, who are a family of ours, cousins.
I came to Scotland nearly, it's 11 years ago for the first time. So for all the 11 years was on and off. Leith, Poland, different parts of Edinburgh. So now it is about 3 years that I'm back to Leith. And I really feel for this community.
I was born and brought up here in Edinburgh, but my mother and father originally were from Hong Kong.
I love Leith Walk. I've been living here for the past 2 years, and I've seen how Leith Walk has changed. It's an amazing neighborhood because it's a very multicultural neighborhood. And you can see a lot of different restaurants, different cultures all together. It's amazing.
Leith and working in Leith and living near Leith is really about the diverse backgrounds and the amount of countries that people come from that converge on Leith really, and it makes for a vibrancy so that Leith is an active and vibrant place to work.
For me it's about acceptance. I feel wonderfully almost at home here rather quickly. People are very helpful and I'm just feeling so connected to the place in such a short time. It just feels right for me.
Well, when I just got married, there was only about 40 families, Sikh families in Edinburgh. And from that prospect, it's changed a lot, because there's nearly over 500 families now. And we couldn't get any ingredients, we couldn't buy things here in Edinburgh, and we'd either have to go to Glasgow or when relatives are coming over from India. And by then, there was no phone calls, you just done it by letter. And you would ask them to bring, you know, the things that you couldn't get here. But now, I mean, these changed so much. I mean, you can get every single ingredient, even in the local, like Tesco, Asda, you can just go in there and buy the ingredients, whereas then you could never, people didn't even know what half the ingredients were called. Well, it's called fish potatoes, but my mother-in-law taught me how to make that. It was a dish that they would make in India. It's called a poor man's dish, but it's really, really amazing when it's cooked. And the only thing is, there's no fish in it. There's every other ingredient in it apart from the fish. But it's made the way we would marinate fish and cook fish, so that's the way the recipe's made. Into that, when we marinate the fish even, or the potatoes, is you slice up your potatoes and put them in a bowl, then you add your ingredients of ginger, garlic, fresh herbs, coriander, tomatoes, fresh tomatoes, salt, turmeric, and it's all mixed up together and you leave it to marinate. Usually if you leave it overnight, it makes it more tastier in the morning, but it's fast, so you can do it there and then and cook it and just serve it. But then you always use cooking oil, which you've burned some jouen, it's a herb. That's the only one that's used for fish or making the potatoes. And then it's all cooked and ready.
Way back, my uncle Tommaso, he had the original Vittoria Cafe in Brunswick Street. It was his wife who was called Vittoria, and they had run that cafe from 1963 until 1978 when my father bought the cafe off him. And it was a small place, more of a tea room, cafe, ices kind of place that you would have had in the very late 60s, early 70s, and a very basic menu, cooked by Italians, but very little Italian on the menu. When we first started, you know, the most popular dishes were things like gammon steak, liver and onions, liver and bacon, a Spanish omelette, steak and chips, mince pie, beans and chips. The popular dish back then, a ham salad, a bacon roll, a tomato roll, soup. You know, Italian food was 10-15% of the menu. People's way of eating out was a bit different back then. Our family, the Crawler family, has been in Edinburgh for about 100 years. There was a wave of immigration at the turn of the last century, beginning of the 20th, and then post-war there was another big exodus from Italy. A lot of our cousins and uncles came over. So Leith Walk really is a melting pot of, you know, North African, Mediterranean, East European, Scots. I don't know what proportion of people are Scottish that Leith Walk really has. And what I've noticed now is that a lot of delis have opened that are Polish and East European. We've got Spanish restaurants, we've got Portuguese, lots of Indian, a bit more regional now. You know, there's still us as Italians. There's lots of different ethnic minorities here.
My name is Magda Czarnecka and I am manager of Phoenix. And Phoenix is a charity working with Central Eastern European community in Edinburgh. It was set up by people who newly arrived from Poland mostly. So there were educators, psychotherapists, psychologists who noticed that there were problems happening in the new wave of Polish people who arrived to Edinburgh and Leith. And there was not enough services, for instance, for them already. So they created this organization to help them.
I got the recipe from my great-grandfather. He used to have a colonial shop before the Second World War. Although Poland didn't have colonies, but we had all the ideas about the colonies as well. The recipe survived Second World War. After the war, my great-grandfather lost his shop. It was due to communism. But my father wanted to really keep the tradition. So when we were children, he started making the gingerbreads with us, and once I moved over here, I thought that's something that I can actually give to my friends because it's handmade, it's made by me with love and with all this tradition. So I have quite a lot of Polish friends, but also Scottish here, so I'm sharing the love with everyone. So it's a blend of spices, cardamom, ginger, cloves, nutmeg, and all kind of colonial spices you can imagine. I guess you could add to it as well. It's very personal thing, so you can kind of combine and make the whole combination yourself. So my gingerbread tastes differently every year, pretty much. It's almost like a reflection of a day when I'm making it, so it's quite cool.
So we are today in Out of the Blue, where we are hosting one of our conversation cafes. The Leith Conversation Cafe is a project for people who newly arrived to Edinburgh, who want to meet new people but also learn about services available. Nearly every year we host about 30 nationalities, so we have people from all around the world, all walks of life, and it's great to see them at one table and talking about life and exchange their experiences.
This place first started in 1988. Before that, the building I think was a garage, and then the owners bought the place and turned it into the shop that you know today. Originally, it started off as just Chinese cuisine-based stuff, be it food or equipment, that sort of thing. But over the years, it sort of branched out into Oriental stuff. It's not just Chinese customers, pretty much Western, Indian, Pakistan, Japanese, Korean, everywhere you name it really. It's been around for a long while, and a lot of Asian restaurants, they come to us for their supplies. Pretty much what we probably have, that's bigger or smaller Western supermarkets don't have.
We strive to be authentic, Spanish tapas bar with imported ingredients. Everything is important from Spain to give the authenticity, and also laid-back service, laid-back atmosphere. Going back many years ago, this place used to be the Dalmeny bar. It's an old pub. We do understand that must be people sentimentally attached to the place, but as soon as you walk through, you can see the transformation we have done here.
Well, there are a lot of Spanish restaurants here in Edinburgh, but we are different in a way that everything here is homemade.
When we opened 2.5 years ago, we were designed to be a pinchos and a croquetas bar. And then along this time, we've been through a transformation again. Our food has been very popular. And then today, if you look at our menu, you can find a steak in the menu. And then all the classic Spanish dishes, the tortilla de patatas, through pimentos padrón peppers, pimentos de padrón, and tortilla de patatas, chorizo vino. So you can find all these ingredients in our menu today. So this is all about sharing with the Leith community and to understand how it's like to live in Spain through our food.
Jeff and I are from Australia, and Australia has a long history of having Irish and Scottish migrants, and one of the things that the Irish brought to Australia was Irish soda bread, and the Australians turned it into damper. And damper looks a lot like this, and this is in fact a Scottish bran scone, which is an adaptation of our damper from our Irish soda bread, so it's come full circle. And we put local flour and we mill and sift our own bran from that local malted flour. So the malted wheat that we get from a farm in Drem, which is only 10 miles from here, is milled in our own little mill, and we sift out the bran, and that gives it a uniquely Scottish appeal. So it has Scottish ingredients, but comes from a long tradition of Irish soda bread, which went to Australia and then came back to Scotland, and more importantly back to Leith.
Breadshare is all about community baking and baking for the community. So what that means is that we want to make bread accessible to everybody in the community. We want to educate people to understand what real bread is all about and why it's nutritious and good for you, and why you can build better and stronger communities through bread.
So real bread is the way bread's been made traditionally for thousands of years, and particularly in this part of Edinburgh, Leith is where the wheat was coming in, and the mills were all down here at the Leith docks. So it's kind of serendipitous that we're here, and that there's lots of bakeries and lots of artisan and traditional makers of different food products as re-establishing in Leith.
The photography part of the project that I've been involved in has been working with 3 groups. Little Leithers, which is a group of people who make food together, eat the food together and communicate with each other and chat about anything in life. Shachty, which is based in Albany Street, with that group, which is a very diverse group, people who don't speak English or very little English. And lastly is the Palmeni Citadel Joint Project, which is a project which involves a cross-generational aspect to it of young and old. I worked with a Little Leithers group. So what I done with them was I got them to take some photographs of the process of them making the food at different stages, the ingredients. So we took them out individually and they would photograph that. And from that we selected basically a documentary of the process from the start, of them actually starting meeting in the morning and preparing the food, cooking the food, and then finally to us eating the food. So it's a small sort of record of that. The photographs that I've done with Shakti, at first I asked them to bring in things and objects to do with food which they could maybe take some pictures of. Now, because of the nature of the group, then a lot of folk don't actually have much. They've left a lot behind, so they don't really have much. But some people did bring in food. They brought in cultural things to do with food and told me the stories kind of behind them. For instance, breaking fast, breaking Eid with dates and milk, yam and eggs. Was a Nigerian woman told me this great story about yam and eggs, which I just loved because it sounded like ham and eggs, and other similar cultural things. The Palmeni Citadel intergenerational project that I worked on, that was quite different from the other 2 projects in respect from the intergenerational aspect of it. We were working with people from 80 to 8 years old. We listened to stories that were told about food, and we done some activities We done some food tasting, blind food tasting, that was quite a bit fun. And the foods that we used for the blind food tasting I'd actually taken from Shakti, who I'd been working with that week. The foods that were used to break Eid, for instance, that these people were getting to taste, who probably would never get to taste these things in the past.
My name's Declan and I've been coming here for 6 years. I feel like it's been helping me through the highs and lows in life. Doing the food tasting challenge and is teaching quite a lot of us about cameras.
He was great fun. Loved taking pictures himself, took a beautiful picture which we hope to use in the exhibition. And when it came to the food testing, he was one of the ones who really kind of was enthralled to have a shot. I think he was one of the first up there and he tried everything and that was great, made it great fun.
Fun, exciting and adventurous. Bye.
And we also worked with the Living Memory Association and they were very good and they brought in some artefacts to show us and to prompt memories. And we went over there and had a very good chat and discussion with them, young and old, contributing to the different foods that in the past folk were eating and all this kind of stuff, and discussed the relevance of them. And from that, I managed to get a few people to tell me their stories.
My name's Jean Budge, and I come to this as an intergeneration group. I've done for 8 years. It's a mixture of old and young. We mix together, have fun together, and it's just a great thing to be out and about and help mix with the young ones.
I hadn't realised that the Citadel actually used to be a train station, and her husband had worked from here.
He used to come in here. It was the North Leith Station, LNER. He used to come in with the stuff from the docks when the boats were getting unloaded. It could be perishables, it could be flour, maybe sugar, you know, heavy stuff. And it would come in here and then go to the different destinations it was supposed to go to. And this wall would be part of the station.
And she told this really nice story about her husband working in the docks at one time. His train was working from the docks and he picked up some bananas. And they were going to the theatre that night, so he took her a banana. She described how this was the first banana she'd ever seen in her life. It was the first one she'd ever eaten in her life. And she ate this banana and she felt sick, which wasn't what I was expecting her to say. I was expecting her to say it was a great experience, but it was a lovely story. One of the other folk that we met was George. George is a really interesting guy. He has so many stories. You could write a whole film about him, and there were so many things we could have used. His experiences, though, which we were interested in, of course, was in the food and Leith, and he'd been also on the boats.
I worked from Leith to join the Merchant Navy in Leith, and my two brothers, both of whom did 50 years at sea each, all started their Merchant Navy career in Leith, because Leith at that time gave such a really in-depth grounding in how to conduct yourself as a real person. You're not trendy, you're not fashionable, you're just somebody that wants to work, put food on the table and bring up a family.
He had moved quite a lot of the whiskey and the produce from Leith in here and brought sugar to the place and everything. And he brought out this really macabre looking thing, a docker's hook, which he told us the story about, how he had to get this made personally by a blacksmith who'd make up the docker's hooks, so they would all be done individually. And he'd handed that over to the Living Memory Association to keep to show others. So we managed to borrow that and we had his photograph taken back. When it actually comes to making the portraits themselves, I like to let folk just go into whatever mode they do. With certain things it's more difficult though. For instance with George, with the docker's hook, it just looked like something out of a bad movie with this hook because it looks like a violent object. However, at one stage when we're doing it, he slings it over his shoulders and he said, this is how we used to walk about on the ship with the hook. This is how you would carry it. And he just brought a slight smile to his face and that was the picture.
And when we designed all this and we actually started painting, we deliberately left these last two panels free. We would ask people, what do you think should be in the vacant panels? And we got all sorts of responses back. And we decided to make them really a forward-looking question mark. And the composition of this section actually is based on a big question mark. And it shows a sequence of Leith falling into disrepair and dereliction, people being rehoused out to Granton, Pilton. And then as you move down through the sequence, it shows what in the 1980s was the current economic regeneration of Leith and the rebuilding of new housing. And also the other aspect to it, the arrival of the wine bar and the yuppie. And the final panel depicts a scene of doorways opening and people from all different sections of the community, old people, young people, Sikhs, and the newly arrived professionals, all emerging from their doors and reaching out to take each other's hands. And the message really is, well, wherever we're going, the one thing we have to do is come together as a community.
Yes, I do feel that the community spirit is still here, because there's lots to be involved in, and people do become involved, which is wonderful, you know.
And the likes the Dalmany Street, the drill hall they're trying to give Leith an identity again as an arts and culture centre.
Although there's been huge changes in Leith, I think the core sense of its own identity has survived. It's survived and adapted and modernised in really quite an exciting and interesting way. But I think the crucial thing is I think it's still maintained its links and sense of continuity from the past.
Hopefully I qualify to be considered as a Leither. That would make me very, very happy. I would let someone else make that judgment.
There is still absolutely a Leith, a strong Leith identity. People here identify with Leith. If you go anywhere in the town and say, where's you come from? It's a reflex, I'm a Leither.
Well, it means you've got an identity, doesn't it? I don't know if many people say I'm a Morningsider or I'm a Christophersider, but I'm a Leither, yeah. Happy to say I'm a Leither.
Fiercely proud, welcoming and gregarious.
Interesting, happy, proud.
Community spirit, still alive.
Vibrant, multicultural, developing. Leith is more kind of down to earth, it's real, I guess.
Can't get parked. I can't get parked.
Diverse.
Connected.
Vibrant.
Helpful.
Friendly, authentic, cosmopolitan, and energetic.
I think that just everybody's just so friendly. That's the biggest thing, you know. And once you get started talking to somebody, you know, they just talk like what I'm doing.
Nibs is Leith.
And this is what they wanted me to say. Pure Raj, eh? Is that good? Oh, one more. Okay. Pure Raj, eh? No, that's a bit.
To be honest, I think the sun will always shine in Leith. That's it. And I hope it always does. Hope it always does.
Go on the bus up to Edinburgh and I can't get back to Leith quickly enough. There's, you know, that's maybe not, maybe I shouldn't say that, but it's true.